Hello everybody, welcome back to another video, and today I will be showing you these monsters that I have come up with. And I'll just start off by saying that this is a bunch of work that I did for a commission, and the commission is actually for a character that this one client of mine has come up with, and the character itself. So I'll tell you about the characters. The character is actually this one sort of scientist experimenter type of girl, where she goes around collecting dead things like dead bugs or just anything that's dead, like animals, could even be people, actual cadavers, and then she just experiments on them, kind of like a freakier version of Dr. Frankenstein. And what she does is she collects all these dead things and she chops them up and she puts them back together, and they become these monsters. And the character itself, she is body horror themed. So what she does is she can actually transform into like these little terrifying looking things. And an example would be she could just split herself right down the middle to form like a giant jaw, or like her arms could split into two. Like, it's just all sorts of stuff that she can do with her own body because she experiments on herself. And these monsters that I have come up with are actually a bunch of requests that my client has made. And these monsters, they are supposed to do 4 different things. And this client of mine wanted a monster that could fly, a monster that could swim, a monster that could walk, and a final monster that could like burrow underneath the ground. Although in the end we only decided to only come up with ones that fly and walk and swim. And I'll tell you more about these. In total, I guess I sort of come up with about 11 monsters, so 11 in total, with its variations, of course, not including its variations. And I'll talk about these ones first. These are like little jellyfish looking things. They're like balloons and or jellyfish, and these creatures, these jellyfish looking ones, they either float or they swim. At least the ones on top, the ones that look like jellyfish, they can swim and they can also float. And they've got these little appendages coming out of the bottom side, and these things they can actually use to grab onto things and then take them away with them and bring them back to this main character. So they're all supposed to be like these minions that are body horror themed. And the idea is that since this is jellyfish themed, at least these first ones, they consist of these flaps. They kind of look like human skin or like human fat, or just like stuff that you would normally see on a human being, or at least a mammalian. And they sort of just float. They float or they swim, and they look like they pulsate just like a jellyfish would whenever they either float in the air or they swim under the water. And the other variation is that I just gave it this one eyeball that it can use to just look around with, and I gave it like this little rib cage coming out of the bottom, and then some sharper parts to make it look like they can actually claw onto things like a finger would. And this last one is pretty much still like a jellyfish, but it could also float. It can pulsate in a more elegant looking way, because the first ones that I did were looking kind of tight. So I decided to make ones with like these flaps of skin / fat that is more flabby, and they're hanging more loosely, so they can sort of pulsate more elegantly while they float or they swim. And then these ones on the bottom are actually squid themed, and they look kind of phallic, but the idea I had in mind was that these are like squid themed. They can sort of just jet out this spray of water out the bottom, and they can shoot themselves, propel themselves in the water that way. And it's got these veins. And I also have one version without an eyeball, and also these little tentacle things coming out of the bottom that they can use to just grab things and then take them away with them. And this final one, I guess you could also make this final one fly, but I think, I mean that you can make this final one swim, but I think it suits it better if you could just make this final one only fly, because it's supposed to be balloon themed. It's got these it's quite actually big. So there's this little head on the bottom and stuff coming out the bottom of the head, like finger looking things, and another tentacle, an extra tentacle that it can use to just grab onto things. And these things on top, they are balloon looking, so the idea is that it would be either filled with air if they were to swim, and that way they can sort of control their buoyancy and they can decide whether to sink or to float up. And if they were in the air, those would be filled with gas that would be lighter than like normal air, kind of like how helium would work. And so that's about it for ones that fly and swim. And the second sheet of monsters that I've come up with, I'll start with the very first one. It's pretty much just a human head. It's like a decapitated head with just stuff coming out of it, stuff coming out of its mouth, its openings, like its eye sockets. And I could also make one come out of its ears, but I think that would have been too much. I mean, I think it should just be enough to imply that these little intestine-looking things can actually come out of any opening by making it come out of at least one eye socket and coming out of the mouth. But I've also taken the liberty of splitting some holes open on top of this guy's head, and in that way this actually can make these intestine-looking things that's already inside the head just come out of it. And on the bottom side there are these legs. These legs are like bone-shaped, like bug-shaped, and it can use that to walk around with. And if you look closer, there's actually like a little spinal column sticking outside there. And this next one is a trilobite-themed monster, and it looks like a trilobite pretty much, but instead of little legs on the bottom side, it's actually quite long, instantly, and it looks like tentacles. It's more like wriggly looking tentacles. And even though they are tentacles, they are actually bend themselves and are performing much like how an actual centipede legs would, right? And then I think it would be cool to just have one variation that just looks like this, because the idea is that maybe there are eyes on the bottom side and there's nothing on top, kind of like an actual like common trilobite, right? But for the other variation that I did for this is I gave it a face and I also gave it a nose. I mean, it's a face, so it's supposed to contain eyes and a nose and a mouth, right? But I gave it eyes and a nose and a mouth, and the tongue that's coming out of its mouth is sort of solid looking, and it can use that to like hold on to things like a tail, and then it would grab it with its mouth and it can carry it back to its master because it's supposed to be a minion. And the last variation of these trilobite looking ones is actually the scariest looking. It's supposed to look like a human hybrid of a trilobite. So it's got this trilobite looking top, but it's also got this human face on it, right? And it's surrounded by holes. And this thing, it's got like human looking limbs, but they're sort of broken and then bent in ways that normally would be impossible unless the human being itself would actually have broken limbs. And it's got the fingers coming out of places it shouldn't, and there are missing fingers where there should be fingers. So that's the scariest looking variation in my opinion. And I made another variation where there are actually stuff coming out of these holes, and these tentacles, they actually are like intestine shaped, and they are also for holding onto things that it can find, and it would just grab onto those things with it and then carry it back to its master. Or it can also just carry those things by bringing it over to the head's mouth, and then it can bite onto the thing and then just carry it back home that way. And moving on to this other one, I made this simplistic looking design. It's pretty much like just a scary looking floating head with too many teeth, and it's supposed to be an orc looking head because of the nose, and it's got its lower jaw just sort of ripped off, and you can see the silhouette of the many teeth behind it. And this other one, I call it the butterfly. This one is also supposed to just fly because it's butterfly shaped, although instead of wings it's actually like a rib cage attached to a spinal column, and on the top it's actually a human head. It's like a decapitated human head, and it's just smiling. Like you can see it's eerily smiling, and it's got these overly long hair that's unkept because it's supposed to come from like a dead body. And on its bones, the rib bones, there are actually bits of flesh still stuck to it. So this thing would sort of just fly, although it wouldn't actually flap its wings / rib cage things like a butterfly would. It was sort of just like it would just sort of pulsate like a mix of a jellyfish and centipede, kind of like a centipede legs would, but instead of walking on the ground, it would be flying that way. At least that's how I picture it would be animated. And this other one is a bulbous looking floating tumor, and this is a gas-based monster. So it's got these tumors on the sides. Well, this thing is pretty much like a whole giant tumor, but these are like bulbous looking sacs on the sides, on the left and right, and it's got these gases inside of it that's making this monster float. And gases are also coming out of the opening, like the slit right down the center, and it's got teeth in it. And I gave it a face, right? So that's supposed to be the mouth. And I also gave it eyes and a nose. So it looks kind of actually still like a floating head, although it's more monster looking instead of just like a floating head. And this final one is actually quite an extensive exploration that I've done. This is supposed to be like a mix of a centipede, at least its butt is like a centipede, and then the body itself is actually spinal column shaped with these tentacle looking centipede legs coming out of it, because it's got these holes on the sides of it, of the spinal column, and the spinal column is actually still wrapped in flesh. It's not all bony, it's actually got skin, and out of these holes on the sides are actually these little legs coming out of it. And it's using this to walk, right? And on top of the spinal column, there are these hands, and these hands are actually the things that can grab onto things and bring it back home. And so this thing is supposed to like walk. But another request that my client made was that this head would be able to grab onto like a head that it would find. And the idea is that it would just use this head as camouflage, because the head would be coming from a dead body, but it would just grab onto the head to make it look like it's still alive, like an actual human head. And that idea was that so that it could attract people by looking like a normal human being, but then as soon as a human being comes close, it would actually ambush them, like surprise them. And here we have on the bottom is an exploration as to how it would stand up and surprise you before it actually eats you up. And it's supposed to stand using these giant feet that's on the lower side of its body, and the centipede butt would be used as like a I don't know what it's called actually. It's like a chair, like you can sit on it, kind of like a kangaroo tail, because those kangaroo tails are so strong, right? And the insect butt is supposed to be strong enough that this creature can just sit on it, and the rib cage would open up around the top and to make itself look bigger. And there's this one variation without the head stuck on it, and another variation with the head on it. And these are actually variations of the hands that could grab onto the head And we've got one version that just looks like a messed up looking mutated human hand. It's just like got too many fingers and fingers coming out of just parts of the hand where it shouldn't. And we've also got this one more like praying mantis themed claws. And this final one is sort of like just bones without any actual anatomy. Like, it's not accurate in terms of anatomy because it's sort of just wrapped in tissue, in skin, and the fingers are actually just bound together with skin. There's no muscle and no meat, it's just skin. And these are actually versions of the upper part of the spinal column, so it's either going to look like it's chopped off because you can see the bone there and the flesh, or it could end in this sort of stump with tentacles coming out of it, either tentacles or these arms. And these tentacles and or arms are supposed to be the parts that could grab onto objects so it can bring it back home, or it could actually grab onto like a human head to disguise itself. So those are the bunch of monsters that I've come up with. So it's about 11. It actually is 11 without counting any of its variations, right? So I made 11 monsters using this lasso tool looking design, using the lasso tool technique. Hopefully you enjoyed that. This was actually quite a fun commission that I did. I quite like designing things this way, using the lasso tool, and creature designs is one of the things that I like to do. And if you're interested in more creature designs from me, please go ahead and leave a comment to tell me about the types of creatures you'd like me to design, so I can consider that for any of my future videos. Hopefully you enjoyed that and you learned something, and if you have any questions, feel free to just ask me down in the comment section below, and I will do my best to reply. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.